Hey everyone, thanks for joining me for another devlog for Dauphin. I am joining you again on Monday morning just after 7 a.m. and it's looking like it's going to be a beautiful start to the week. I know I've been pretty quiet for a while, so sorry about that. After the end of the last devlog, I just realized that my first effort creating the save system was really kind of a botch job that introduced quite a few defects and some technical debt. So over the past week, I've been refactoring and cleaning and actually making the system more organized and extensible for use throughout the rest of the project. The result of this refactor was actually very positive. A lot of the improvements you can't really see because they're part of my saving logic, but if you did watch the last devlog, you'll notice that as we transition to the open ocean here, it's just a lot smoother. You don't actually see the ocean being built in the foreground. That all happens before the scene fades back in. And at this point, the research vessel actually spawns below the island from which you just disembarked. So that looks a little bit more immersive, I would say, when you're actually leaving the island to travel to a new one. And of course, when we do travel to a new island like this little tiny one over here to the east, we can spawn back on that island once we get close to it, and progress will be saved just as it was before. The only downside of this work has been a bit of burnout just from working on the save system for so long, and I'm definitely feeling that right now. So to combat that, I'm going to steer completely clear of my Trello board and avoid jumping into a new feature, and instead just enjoy a week of adding some small fun details to Dauphin. Maybe some new life to inhabit these islands, some new artwork, and maybe some lighting as well. In fact, to kick things off this morning, I'm going to play around with adding a day-night cycle, something I've been wanting to tackle for a while now. I took a very over-engineered stab at this a while back, but recently saw that Miguel over at BitBrain posted a very concise tutorial on this topic, which I intend to implement this morning. So I'm going to grab some Joe, watch that tutorial again, and see if I can't come up with some cool new lighting effects for the beach. Alright, it is now 5 p.m., just signed off of work, and I want to quickly run you through the progress I made on the day-night cycle script this morning. And I want to give a special thanks to Miguel for that great tutorial. It definitely helped me create a strong foundation that I was able to build upon for my specific use case for Dauphin. Now, I'm not going to walk you through every line of code because I think Miguel's tutorial does a great job of that, but what I do want to show you is what I added on top of that tutorial here in the process function. And what I added were these three different modes for this day-night cycle. The first mode here that I'm calling in-game is what's represented in the tutorial. You have a timescale variable here that you can change to speed up or slow down the advancement of the day-night cycle in the game. The next mode here is static, which, as you might suspect, just keeps time still at a particular time of day that you choose. Finally, we have system mode, which keeps the day-night cycle in-game in sync with the time reported by your operating system. Think of something like Animal Crossing, where if you play in the early morning, it'll actually be early morning in-game. This was a little bit trickier than I suspected. We have a call here that's pretty handy, os.getTime, which gets the time from your system, but you get kind of a funky dictionary here, which you can see at the bottom. I'm converting that to seconds, and then ultimately taking a 12-hour day into account to figure out how far we've currently progressed during the day, in the morning or the afternoon. Now, where this all comes together is in my very handy base stage scene, which is the foundation for really any scene that the player can explore, like all the islands we've created so far. Here in my base stage scene, I've just added an instance of that day-night cycle node. And if we look over at the inspector here, you can see some of those values that we were just talking about. We can change the time mode. If we choose static, we can select a static time between morning, noon, evening, and night. And then if we choose in-game, we can actually change this timescale value to decide how fast we want time to progress. For a quick demo here, we'll start out with the in-game mode, and we will change the timescale to 1 just to make this cycle really quick so that you can see what all the colors look like. These are using the colors from Miguel's video, and I think they're actually a lot better than what I had before. Still maybe a little bit of tweaking on the reds in the early morning and the evening, but overall this is a really cool effect for a very small time investment. And of course, if I was to change the time mode to static and set the static time to noon, when we run the game, we should see the normal kind of bright scene that we are used to seeing. And if we go ahead and change this to system, because it's just after 5 o'clock here, we should see kind of an evening look. And sure enough, it's bright red, looks like the sun is setting early, but the system is working. Alright, super happy with that progress today. Really cool to be able to spend just a few hours to create a piece of functionality like that. But for now, I need to run some errands, and then keeping with the theme of recovering from some burnout, I will probably take the night off this evening. So we'll catch up in the morning to kick off our next task. Good morning and welcome back to Tuesday at 7:30 a.m. Just finished up my workout, which took a little bit longer than expected, but I probably still have about an hour or so of dev time before work today. Last night, as I was thinking about my tasks this morning, I thought it could be fun to explore an initial implementation of weather effects to go along with my day-night cycle. I'll probably try and just start out with rain, but in the future, I'd really like to implement general sunny or cloudy weather, storms, and even something like hurricanes. But for now, just time to learn the basics. Alright, fast forward about 12 hours and here we are just after 8 p.m. I had a productive morning, I made it through work and managed to spend some time outside after work, and I figured it'd be a nice way to close out the evening with a brief update on the progress I've made so far for the weather system. So here we are taking a look at my weather script, and right off the bat you'll notice it's not very long, and in just a moment you'll see that the weather effect right now doesn't actually look that good, but there is something important that I want to show you about this script that I think makes it a good foundation for future weather effects. So first off, over here in the hierarchy, the weather node is just a node 2D, and I have a child which is a particles 2D. And this particular child represents rain, but I'll probably have future children particles 2D to represent things like fog and wind and who knows what else, whatever I decide to build for other weather effects. Now what's important about this script are the two ways that I am manipulating the size and shape of this particle system. The first thing I want to point out is the shape. I have the emission shape set in the actual particle material here as a box, which you can see right here in the inspector. What this means is that I can come into my script and change the emission box extents to kind of describe the shape from which I want particles to be emitted. And for this particular particle system, I am using the viewport rect to only emit particles over basically what you're seeing while the game is playing. With my emission shape set up correctly, at this point I really just want to keep the particle system in the right place in the world. And for that, here in my process function, I'm just setting the global position of the parent weather node to be the same position as the player. So really, this thing's just always following the player around. The result of these two things working in concert is a weather system that only shows weather effects exactly where it needs to on the screen. No further outside of the bounds of this viewport than it needs to, and it just follows the player around so it's always in the right spot. And this will be a little easier to visualize if I actually zoom out my camera here on my base stage, which is again where the weather system lives over here as a child. So if I zoom out that camera and run the game again, it's a little bit hard to see, but you'll notice that all this space further around outside the player, we're not seeing weather effects. So we're not having these particles drawn in all these places on the screen where they don't need to be during normal gameplay. Now obviously the rain effect itself is looking a little bit rough here, but I think that's okay. We do at least now have the foundation for how to set up and properly size this particle system. So now I can actually go focus on the particles themselves, the size, the speed, and the shape, as well as maybe adding a little animation when they're at the end of their lifetime as if they're kind of splashing when they hit the ground. I think we could also use a canvas modulate here to make the sky look a little bit darker. I think that'll do it for tonight though. I'm gonna grab some tea and just relax a little bit. Tomorrow is supposed to be a rainy day, so maybe that'll be just the inspiration I need to make this look a lot better. We'll catch up soon. Hey everyone, welcome back to Sunday morning just after 9 o'clock. This week has been a bit busier and less productive than expected, as you can probably tell by our jump to the end of the weekend here, but that's not to say I haven't made some interesting progress on the weather system. I haven't found the time yet to take a deep dive into these rain particles and make them look a whole lot better, but I did implement a change that I think makes the entire weather system feel a bit more immersive overall. So I'll go ahead and turn off the emission of these for now, let the weather system take over, and play the game. And you'll see that we start out here on a sunny afternoon. This is actually the noon time associated with the day-night cycle. and you'll see that the sky is kind of getting darker here. We can see a little bit of a light forming around the player, and after the sky reaches a certain darkness, rain begins. Now, this is kind of a contrast to how I had it before, where if I had rain toggled on, it would just be raining whenever the scene started up. My intent is for the player to be exploring an island or be out on the ocean and experience the feeling of kind of a storm rolling up, the sky getting darker, and it beginning to rain and thunder and lightning, as it often does on a real beach, when a storm can kind of roll up very quickly and unexpectedly. That's the feeling I want to capture with this system in Dauphin. Here in my weather script, you can see it's actually pretty straightforward to achieve the effect of a storm kind of rolling in, as I'm calling it. I have a function called transition to effect where I pass in one of the values in my weather type enumeration up here. And as we match against those values, of course, if we hit the rain value, we really just do two things. We use a tween to darken the sky, and then once that tween is completed, we change the particle system emitting equal to true. And at that point, I also actually randomize and start a timer, which will represent the duration of that storm, and after that timer ends, the storm will stop. I think one of the cool things about this implementation is how I'm tweening the darkness value of my day-night cycle. If we jump over to the day-night cycle, you can see how I'm doing that. Here in the bottom of my process function is where we're actually setting the color of the modulate, which is the day-night cycle. And then if we have a darkness value, we can just call the built-in darkened function on our color and apply that darkness to it. And what this means is that when we have weather that introduces darkness like rain, we can apply that darkness to any time of day without having to manually control that color. To show you an example of that, I can open up my base stage here and select my day-night cycle, and instead of having it set for static time at noon, I can actually just set it to system time since it's the morning here. And when we hit play, we should see kind of that red sunrise color, and since I have it programmed to start raining, we can actually see that color darkening as the rain moves in, the light forming around the player, and rain should begin any moment now. So it's just a little bit darker. And again, the red color is not perfect here for the morning. We'd probably want to blend that to something a little bit grayer. But overall, this is a really easy and pretty cool programmatic effect in my opinion. All right, I think that weather system's actually in a pretty good place given the relatively small amount of time I invested into it this week. I'm going to hold off on building it out any further until I have a more clear idea of how I want weather to impact Dauphin's gameplay and story in the future. For the remainder of today and this devlog, there is one more task I want to knock out, and that is the addition of a new organism to the world. It's been a really long time since I've built a new creature into the game, and I really plan for the finished product to have a huge variety of wildlife, so I think I need to get into the habit of introducing new ones incrementally. Today I want to add one of my personal favorite sights on the beach, which is the sandpiper, those quick little birds that forage at the water's edge and zoom down the beach if you get too close. But first, I need to get out of the office for a bit and get some fresh air on a really beautiful Sunday morning. Alright, I think it's time for the final update of the devlog. It didn't take me long at all to create a very, very basic implementation of our sandpiper, and sure enough, I think he just adds a little bit more charm to Dauphin, so let's head to the island and check him out. Here is our little sandpiper, and as you might imagine, he is his own scene as a kinematic body 2D, and as children, he has all the same child nodes that make him an organism, just like the cave bats and the sand crabs that you see on the beach. He has a state machine, he has a corruption node that creates that shading effect and the particles that you see wafting off of him, and he also has a detection circle to keep an eye on the player, an animation player and tree, and in this case he actually has a terrain detector as well to prevent him from walking out into the water, something I do desperately need to add to the crabs. Now, most of those components I had already created before for previous organisms, as I mentioned, like the bats and the crabs. In order to give this particular creature a unique behavior, all I had to do was make some tweaks to an existing state and create a new one. So for my first state here, under the state machine, we see the wander state. Normally this is what controls the crabs just kind of moving in random directions all over the beach. In this case, I want this guy to walk back and forth in a horizontal line following the water, as they often do in real life. So I made a quick tweak to the wander state to create a wander mode here that you can see in the inspector. and I can choose horizontal, vertical, or both. The crabs are using both to wander all over the place, and this guy is using horizontal to walk left and right on the shoreline. The new state that I created for this little guy is called the fear state, and as you might expect, it is responsible for navigating the sandpiper away from a particular target of which the sandpiper is afraid. In our case, that's going to be the player. If we jump into this state, there's actually not a lot going on here. We play a specific animation, and then we move in a direction away from the target. The important part of this is setting the target, which is this fear source here. If we jump over to the script for the sandpiper, we can see how this is working in conjunction with the detection circle, which is detecting the player. When the player is picked up by this detection circle, it emits a signal, which is what we see here. When we capture this signal, we can see if the colliding body is the player, and if it is, we call fear, which of course requests the fear state, and in our case disables collision so that the bird can safely fly off the screen. The result of all that is this cute little fella stomping around in the sand down here, and of course we can see that he is unfortunately corrupted just like the crabs with his purple shader and his particle effects, so we want to help cleanse him of that corruption. Normally we'd do that with a little smack from our prototype melee weapon here, but unfortunately if we get too close to this guy, he's going to get spooked and fly away and stay corrupted. We definitely don't want that. Although this is a really simple example, my intent here is to make the player think about how they might have to change their tactics to remove corruption from different types of organisms. Of course, we only have two methods of doing that right now, kind of a melee and a ranged option, so the solution here is clear. It's the ranged option. If we go ahead and hit him with that prototype ranged attack, he is cleansed but still spooked and flies off. And of course the crabs, as always, we can just kind of use either of those two methods there. Now once we have cleansed our first one of those sandpipers, my intent is to create a new entry in the player's field notes for that sandpiper and log that we have cleansed one of them from corruption. I had a pretty fun time working on this guy. It only took me a few hours to both create his artwork and animations and code up a very basic set of behaviors for him. Kind of makes me want to create way more new organisms in the near future. But before I do that, it seems like I should invest some time into the player's field notes so that we can keep a log of the creatures we've saved throughout our journey. Maybe that's what we'll jump into in the next devlog. As always, I really hope you enjoyed the video, and I want to give a huge shout out to my Garami supporters on Patreon. Cody Odin, Finnick Fu Games, Mega Ombre, Vlad Sunny, James Kennedy, our newest member, Jess Zargo, and those who wish to remain anonymous. I hope you'll keep an eye out for the next devlog. I have some very big changes in store for my new office, and I'm excited to hear what y'all think. In the meantime, stay safe, and I'll see you soon.